This is my son, Ian. Perhaps you don't see Ian as someone who could live in his own home, someone whose own likes and dislikes could determine who he would share his house with, someone who's gone to work at the same video store for the past 9 years, someone who has control over decisions about his own life. It's not likely that most people would see Ian like that. As human beings, as individuals, we make decisions with the help of whatever support we can get, the people around us, the people we care about. The biggest challenge for Ian and people like Ian is having some recognition in law and society that it's okay to have that kind of support making decisions, and it should be seen as Ian's decision. People whose capacity to make decisions is questioned are very vulnerable to being placed under guardianship. And supported decision making is a solution, but it's not just a solution for people with disabilities. It's equally as a solution for anybody whose natural capacity to make decisions might be diminishing. Elderly people, for example, people with certain diseases. But the thing about supported decision making and the need for it is that vulnerability starts earlier for a person with a disability. From the age of 18 on, the person is vulnerable to being placed under guardianship. With other people, it's something that tends to happen later in life and at the end of life.
Guardianship is a process by which someone, let's take me as an example, someone other than me, if I'm seen as legally incapable or competent to enter the kinds of agreements, where someone is duly authorized by a court or public guardian or some other legal process to make decisions, some or all decisions about me.
Well, guardianship has been around for hundreds of years. And probably it's had such a long life because it sounds so good. It sounds as though people are being protected from harm and they're being respected. But in reality, it doesn't always work out that way. In fact, it very often doesn't. First of all, people lose respect because they have another label attached to them. And most importantly, they have control formally taken away from them and put in the hands of somebody else. Now, that somebody else may have their best interests at heart and may really be trying to make decisions on their behalf that will be for their benefit. But very often it doesn't work out that way either, because there could be competing people who would like to be guardians, and they sort of push back against one another, and the end result is that the individual is not in a better position.
Well-being. If you look at what keeps us well as we go through life, having a good place to live and good social contacts, but also having that control that Orville talked about, that sense that I have some measure of control over my life and the decisions that are going to affect me. And when you remove that, then I think you really do affect a person's well-being, or their sense of well-being about life in general, and people will feel powerless because they will be powerless.
The well-being point is so central, I think, and our well-being is made in relation to other people. When others see us in valuing ways, right? We know that from infants, from birth. Your well-being depends on how others see you and recognize you and value you. And guardianship really does end up, I think so unintentionally, ends up devaluing people because end up being seen in a different way as someone without self-determination. We know that people are vulnerable to violence and victimization because of unequal power relationships. Whether we're talking about women and violence, children who are violated at the hands of adults, people who are marginalized in their communities by virtue of their homelessness, their race, their color. They're violated in large part because they're no longer seen as human beings.
That's not right. It's not right that in order to have decisions made, one has to lose one's identity as a full participating human being.
It's critical to us that people's legal capacity is protected. Unfortunately, all too often now, people who have an intellectual disability have their rights deprived because it's considered that they do not have the capacity to make decisions. In fact, most of us make decisions drawing on support from those who are close to us, our families, our friends, our partners. It should be no different for people with intellectual disabilities. We recognize that people need support to make decisions, but it's critical to us that they not be denied their rights and that their rights to decision making not be transferred to another person through this convention.
Section 12 of the UN Convention talks about the importance of respecting people's rights to make decisions and having opportunities for support to make decisions.
And it says everyone has legal capacity. So obviously, from here on, once the convention is ratified in this country, as it has been in many countries around the world, it won't be a question, is this person incapable? The question will be, can we put in this person's life a competent process to make decisions that will affect the person for the rest of his life?
For people who have an intellectual disability, especially those who have the most challenges to express their own needs, people who don't use any traditional language, they're so often reliant on their families to help to interpret their desires, their feelings, their choices to the rest of the world. And simply protecting the rights of the individual and leaving it up to the individual to make their needs known makes it impossible for people who don't communicate in traditional ways to actually be able to have a voice.
So the UN Convention provides a right to support to exercise one's legal capacity. What does this actually mean in law and in practice? The term we give it is supported decision making. So effectively, the UN Convention recognizes supported decision making. And what that means, very simply, is that the particular form of assistance that someone needs to make their own decisions is recognized in law. It's authorized, it's given some recognition, whether by a court or a notary or by a physician, that this is a valid form of assistance to a person.
What you do is build a system around that person that can have the authority and have the integrity, so that the decisions that are made are the decisions that ought to be made in the best interest and to the best benefit for that person. It's natural decision making brought into law, because we don't have natural decision making. But I mean, you can't say that you've never consulted with anyone else making a decision. That process goes on in all of our lives. All supported decision making does is make it an alternative, or ultimately the way the law is, because it benefits everybody. For most of us whose legal capacity is never questioned, we don't think that when we do make decisions, we make decisions with the help of other people. It just doesn't occur to us that that's how we made the decision.
My name is Joanne Taylor, and I'm the Executive Director of the NIDAS Personal Planning Resource Centre and Registry, which is located in British Columbia. We've put supported decision making into practice in British Columbia. We have a piece of legislation called the Representation Agreement Act, and a representation agreement is a legal document that allows someone to appoint a person or more than one person that they trust, and that person or people can help them make decisions. One of the reasons that the Representation Agreement Act is so important in British Columbia is that sometimes people don't communicate in a traditional way. They might communicate perhaps with gestures, blinking their eyes, or through their behavior. And this sometimes gets interpreted as, well, I don't understand your communication, therefore you're not capable, which of course is not the case. So one of the things we like to do when we help people with a representation agreement is encourage people to put down how does this person communicate. I have a fairly extensive vocabulary, but my verbal skills are limited. I usually understand everything said to me, however, I do not always.
Charlie's staff respect him, but he is still vulnerable. They can support him to make decisions to get through his day, but they cannot and should not be left alone to help him make major decisions about where he lives or what risks he will take. I know my son is safer when he is included in the ordinary life of the community, where his neighbors can see him, where people may begin to understand that he has needs, where people may even begin to understand that he exists.
They're all like-minded, they all know Ian's interests, they're all totally committed to Ian's well-being, and so when a major decision would have to be made, you've got that thing even though you don't physically have them around him. That circle is there. It's the decision that has to have the integrity, right? It's got to be an unquestionable decision that's safe, that's beneficial, that won't harm. And so you pick the right people. You pick the people who are going to do that.
For us, the most important thing is that it's an alternative to guardianship. Because what often happens when people's capacity is in question is they'll end up in guardianship, which means that their authority to make decision is taken away from them and their rights are taken away from them.
More and more we've been talking social inclusion, and everybody agrees that the days of institutions are over and now people are moving to the community. Social inclusion must, by definition, I think, include inclusion in the process of making decisions about one's own life.
For the first time, it so clearly recognizes this right to support that we haven't talked about it. So we've recognized a right to self-determination and make your own decisions, but if you've needed support, that's been a reason to take that right away from you in so many cases. So for the first time, we've said, yes, you have a right to self-determination. All people are presumed capable of exercising their legal capacity or maintaining this right, regardless of their disability, and we recognize that you have a right to the support to make the decision.
The time has come where the system needs to be developed where people will be supported to make decisions rather than have somebody appointed as their substitute to make decisions.
Those people in a person's life who are committed to that person's well-being and best interest, and that are prepared to stand by the decisions that they make in conjunction with the presence of that person, because around that decision-making process, it's his interests. And Ian, that's their core, that's the core. At our age, it's really important to have a sense of that there is a future for Ian, but B, that there are people who care about Ian having that future and are prepared to continue to work to make sure that he has it. So that's what it's all about.
You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Oh baby, don't you know about winter, spring, summer, or fall? Hey, now all you've got to do is call. Lord, I'll be there, yes I will. You've got